Hello and welcome to the next in our crime fiction manuscript showcase videos, and I'm here today with Kirsty Huxter. Kirsty, lovely to meet you. So,
hi Vicky.
Would you like to just start off by telling us a little bit about you?
Yeah, my name's Kirsty Huxter. I'm originally from Leeds, born and bred. But I've lived in Essex for the last 18 years because I married an Essex boy, so why not? And I've lived in a couple of other cities as well.
Okay, fantastic. And so how long have you been writing then, and sort of where are you at on your writing journey, as it were?
I think in common with a lot of people, I wrote a lot as a child. My ambition was to be a journalist. I didn't think about anything else. But then I kind of got cold feet at university and I didn't end up going into that, but I worked in sports PR for a little bit. But 4 years ago, I turned 40, and in classic middle-age crisis, I sat down and thought, what do I actually really want to do? What am I going to do with the second half of my life? And I really wanted to write, and I thought, why not just give it a go? The children were a bit older, they didn't need me as much. So I've been writing a book for 4 years, and I've been writing some short stories. I've had a couple of stories published on a literary website called Bickering on Sea, which has lots of short stories from all sorts of genres. So I've just been mainly working for the last 4 years on my book.
Mm-hmm. And you're telling me that you work for a youth charity, so I'd imagine that brings you in contact with lots of people. And what's that like then?
Yeah, so I'm the manager of a local youth charity, but we do have connections with a lot of other organisations in the town. So I do see the police. Actually, the main community police officer is the father of a boy who's a friend of my son's, so you know that works quite well. And I've got other friends who work in the Met, and I've got friends still back at home who work for West Yorkshire Police. So that does help to bring in the contacts really from the police kind of side of things.
That's fantastic. Always useful for checking those pesky facts and procedures and and so on. Okay, and so you were telling me a little bit about having done a couple of courses. So how did you find them? And I don't mean how did you learn about them. What did you learn from them, basically, and how have they helped you with writing your novel, do you think?
Well, the first year that I decided to sit down and write, I thought, well, I'll get a bit of guidance. And I did the writing crime fiction course with Julia Crouch with the National Centre for Writing. And that was fantastic. And I still use a lot of the information that Julia gave us and a lot of resources. And that really helped to focus on the nuts and bolts. And it made me think about plot. It made me think about character. It made me think about pacing. So I really, really enjoyed it, and that set me up quite well. And then the next year I was a bit stuck in the middle of writing. I got a bit bogged down in the middle. So I did the Curtis Brown course, writing to the end of your novel, because I thought I needed a bit of a kick up the backside to try and get me there. So that was really helpful as well. And there were a few people that were also on that course that have since published, so I've read their books, so that that's been really good and a good inspiration. And I think both courses really have helped me, particularly with the technical side of writing and the technical side of actually putting my book together. And it's gone through quite a lot of rewrites already and changes since that very first day when I put pen to paper and thought this is what I'm going to write. Yeah,
fantastic. And so what stage are you at then? Sort of what is it that you're looking for? Are you looking for an agent at the moment, or?
Yeah, so I've now finished the first draft. It's about 95,000 words. So I'm happy. I just really wanted to get the story down on paper, and I knew where it was going and who was coming in where were the red herrings and that sort of thing. So I've got that down, although it needs a lot of finessing, and it needs a real laser focus. So now that I've actually got something concrete, I think I'm in a position to go out and look for agents and look for somebody who's going to probably provide that laser focus for me and help and tell me if it's worth sending round.
Fantastic. And so let's just think a little bit about influences. So what crime fiction writers do you like? You know, whose work do you read and think, gosh, I really wish I'd written that?
This is a really hard question, because I could go on. It's like the Oscars. Who do you leave out? So many. I mean, I read a lot, and there's so many great writers. I don't think I've read a book that I haven't thought was good. I suppose in terms of police procedurals, then Peter James, Ian Rankin and Val McDermid are kind of my gold standard. But I read a lot of historical crime fiction as well. So Andrew Taylor, Laura Shepherd Robinson, Abir Mukherjee, Wasim Khan. But my absolute go-to, if I had a pile of books, who would I pick up first, is Ellie Griffiths. I think we all love Ellie. Yeah. I've even read Ellie's Tuscany books when she wrote as Domenica, as her real name. Yeah. But I think that Ellie is able to, she's really accessible, she's really readable, but it's not low quality. She's worked hard to get to that point, but it's easy to read, and you've got great action and great plots, but actually it's the characters that keep you coming back. So I don't know anybody who does not love Ruth and Nelson. Yeah. So we all want to know what's going to happen with Ruth and Nelson. So I think she's really established. So both series, the Stevens and Mephisto books, and both Ruth Galloway and Nelson, really established a long-running series that keeps it interesting and really keeps it readable.
And it's not easy. I mean, she makes it look easy. Yeah, but it's definitely not. But she almost makes it look easy. But certainly there, keeping them fresh. And giving people the bits that they want, but still keeping them fresh, and is no mean feat at all. And so, what books have you got on your bedside table at the moment? Who are you reading, and who's wowing you?
Well, last night I just finished The Devil's Advocate by Steve Kavanagh, and again, I love his Eddie Flynn series. Yeah. But I think of books this year that I really enjoyed, I would say The Jigsaw Man by Nadine Matheson. I think it's Nadine's debut book, and I think it's gritty. I think it's there's a bit of gore, which is quite nice, but I think she really brought it together, and I think there's enough in there. There was enough depth in there, again, to possibly follow these characters as a series. So I'm going to shout out to Nadine.
Yeah, oh my goodness, I know. I haven't actually read her book yet, but I've seen her talking about it a couple of times, and and I have got it on my Kindle. I actually, I can't wait to dive in. And she posted a video, I think, of her mum. I think her mum was reading her book or something. I don't know if you saw, and her mum was. I have. Something with her about, I can't believe my daughter X, Y, and Z, or something or other, which is just, it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, I think I love Nadine's mum as well.
So let's just think a little bit then about your manuscript. So it's a police procedural then, subgenre wise.
Yes.
And you've said, so it's at the minute it's about 95,000 words, and you finished your first draft, so you're in the process presumably of kind of going over that, are you, and sort of rewriting?
I am. Yeah, I'm kind of heavily in the picking apart my timelines and who's doing what at what time, and why somebody seems to have done nothing all day and then they come in the evening, and I think that's not right. So yeah, I'm steadily going through and just making sure everybody's where they should be, and it's following on logically, and that the bit of evidence that they've just talked about they've actually already found.
Yeah, oh my goodness. Well, if you're doing timeline stuff, then that's just fantastic, really, because it will save you, and it will save an editor. sure they'll go over it as well, too. It will save them a lot of time. That stuff about who's where, but also who knows
what
when.
I know.
So that is particularly, and I found, for writing, of all the books that I've written, I find with police procedural that, is the most complicating thing about, who knew what when. And how did they find it out, sort of thing. And then particularly when you start moving around the scene order, and then and it completely stuffs up your timeline, because then you've got, but hang on a sec, they didn't know that then,
I know.
And then
I've had a little bit of that.
So well done. That sounds fantastic. Like you're well on your way to really getting together a strong draft to start sending out. So think about the series then, and whether it's a standalone or a series. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that? So first of all, let's start with the title. And so what is your working title at the moment?
So my working title, I suppose it's not that exciting at the moment, is LS1, just because LS is the Leeds postcode. And I thought about setting it in the postcode of the area where most of the action takes place, but actually I realized that would just jump about all over the place and just be confusing. So actually LS1, because it's the first in the series, but it is my intention that it's the start of a series. So it's set in July 1981. And my intention is that it's a series that will run through the 80s. And there will be events, sometimes just in the background, or there will be events that will play quite a big part of the plot. For some reason, I've jumped a few years in terms of my thinking, and I've really been thinking about the miners' strike kind of book and what's going to happen in that. But there's other things, because I think I want it to be very much of that place. So it's set in Leeds because that's where I grew up, and this is my city as a that I remember as a child. So there are a lot of things that will be going on, some national but some more local, that I want to bring in. So my idea is that this is the start of a series.
Fantastic. Well, it's fiction after all, don't forget, and it's your book, so you're entitled to do whatever you want with it. So if you want to leave out events, and there's nobody standing over you with a gun.
I'm probably gonna so sometimes it might only jump ahead like 3 or 4 months. Sometimes I might jump ahead 6 months or a year, just depending on what I want to write about.
I think that sounds fantastic, and also to have the plot then grounded in those real life events, I think can be really, really powerful. So sort of whose work then would you say it could be similar to, or kind of where would it sit on a shelf, do you think?
Well, it is a police procedural, so I kind of sit it in a bit like you associate Roy Grace with Brighton, or you associate Vera with Northumbria, or Rebus with Edinburgh. I'm kind of sitting there, but it's slightly historic. It doesn't officially fall under historical crime fiction, because it's only 40 years, and actually I think something like 50 years is the official kind of jump back. But it's similar again a bit, I suppose, to Stevens and Mephisto, because we're now into the 60s with those books. So I think that's kind of where I'm pitching.
And so then just thinking about so if it's set in that era, then obviously that means that your technology and your procedures
absolutely. So I mean that's another thing. Obviously 1984 is the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which really changes things. So that's going to come around the same time as the miners' strike, so that might have to be 2 books. So we're still in a time when, obviously before mobile phones and the internet, but a lot of people still don't have phones in their houses. So we've got a fax machine. There's a fax machine comes in.
I bet that's busy. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's so they do actually have that, but they're not still really using computers particularly. So the secretaries are still using typewriters. They're still indexing everything on cards, and there's a lot of paper. And of course, you're heavily reliant really on fingerprint as physical evidence. There's some forensics, so there's some fibers and that sort of thing going on. And I have been helped, because this is 81, as I said earlier, this is just after, so it's 2 months after the trial of Peter Sutcliffe, the Yorkshire Ripper. So actually, I have read some books that have focused on the investigation and the detective side of the Ripper investigation, which of course is completely pertinent to my force and this time period. So that has helped me to sort of see what I can use and what I can't. But you're still, really reliant on who saw what, was there a witness, somebody's written down a license plate number, and that sort of thing. So you've got to try and get the, but I mean, I do have a history degree, so I should be up for the research, and I am up for the research. So I have sat with my dad in Leeds City Central Library and gone through the microfiche and various other things. So
fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, that took me back 25 years.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I mean, I don't know if you've been watching some of the Manhunt. So they've got 2 series.
Oh yes, with Martin Clunes.
Yeah. And I have found it really interesting because the pacing is quite different. From kind of very sort of techno buzzy fast dramas that we have on telly a lot, and I really enjoy those. But I also found with Manhunt, I found them really quite relaxing to watch, because it's a lot more about the kind of the not the day-to-day policing, but the kind of the detail of it, and kind of the kind of the basic sort of procedural side, rather than very, very sort of swish, technology.
I mean, I really like writing dialogue. I love dialogue. So actually, I've got quite a lot of interviews, and there's one chapter I decided to do. I kind of had a line of duty interview scene in the back of my head, and I thought, why don't I just do a chapter that's completely this interview with this person in the police station? And I kind of had Vicky McClure and Martin Compton at the back of my mind, and the working, so who's saying what and who comes in from the side and has a particular line of questioning. So I kind of went for that to see how that would work. So as I'm rewriting, I'll assess that and see if it actually works. But there's definitely a lot of interviewing suspects or interviewing people.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, that's very popular, with lots of readers. So just tell us a little bit then about, why this story. What is it that motivated you then to write this particular story?
So I wanted to write about Leeds. I think there's not been a vast amount of crime fiction set in Leeds. There's some, and DCI Banks pops down from North Yorkshire occasionally to the big smoke. But really, we're one of the biggest cities in England, and yet there's not really a lot set in that. So it's kind of a love letter to my city, if a love letter involved violence and murder. So so I wanted to write about Leeds. I wanted to go back, and I think I wanted to go back to this period as well, because, as I say, it's my childhood. So there's bits that I'm starting to really remember. And as a historian, I kind of feel there's a bit of safety in history, because you don't have the anxiety or the uncertainty of of everyday life. You know what happens, what the outcome is, so you can write that and you can draw out particularly pertinent things, because you know what happens in the future. So I think it gives you a place of safety, a bit like watching a horror film on your sofa. You're scared, but you're in a place of safety. If the things were happening to you like the horror film, you would feel completely different. So I think it gives you that safety, and for the reader as well, especially if they've lived through this and they know what happens. It allows you to focus on the plot whilst being in a safe place, if you see what I mean. So that's what I really focused on. I went for sort of 81 because, to be honest, actually, what made me go for July 81 in the first place was the Ashes test. Now, I'm a big sports fan. I used to go to Headingley and watch cricket. Now, this is one of the most famous test matches in cricketing history. And it starts off with Australia completely dominating and on top, and somehow England snatch victory from the jaws of certain defeat. And so I started 4 years ago with this premise that my story would follow the pattern of the Ashes that was going on in the city at the time. So it would be really bad at the start, and the police didn't have any leads, and it would be like Australia were on top, and then things would happen to claw it back. But actually, I realized that those 6 days didn't give me enough time. So I needed a bit more time plot wise. So actually, only a few days before the Ashes test starts, there's rioting in a part of Leeds that's had rioting before and after. But it's the rioting that's following the rest of the rioting across the country. So there's a lot of social aspects to that. So I kind of jumped back so that I brought in the rioting and brought in what's going on and the impact that has, because of course that has a massive impact on policing. So that's kind of where I expanded into. But I really wanted the denouement to be on the final day of the Ashes test. And the excitement and the complete disbelief that England have managed to win this, and I wanted that feeling. So the disbelief or the excitement of my detectives in cracking the case. So
that's fascinating, isn't it? And you mentioned about liking Vaseem Khan's books.
Well, I really want Vaseem to read this.
Yeah, well,
he loves this cricket. Oh, no.
So do you want to give us your elevator pitch then?
Yeah, so my elevator pitch is this is Leeds, July 1981. Trouble flares on the streets of Chapeltown, and the Aussies are coming to the city for a big Ashes test. DCI Jack Lane and the serious crime team at West Yorkshire Police are under pressure. Trust in the force has reached a nadir following the recent trial of the Yorkshire Ripper. The team have to investigate the beating of a teenager during the riots and the death of a Leeds University student. Can they discover the connection between the two crimes and prevent Leeds from being plunged into social and political anarchy?
Oh, love it. That sounds great. And so you were saying then that the team that you're going to tell me about, your characters, so that they've been just quite recently formed. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they have, and I'm not. This is not true crime, so I'm not. I don't bring in real detectives, but a big part of this is that in reality, this is only 2 months after the trial of Peter Sutcliffe, and the investigation into the Ripper was a huge investigation for West Yorkshire Police. So following his arrest, there's been an upheaval and there have been changes made in the structure, and they've brought a new team together called the Serious Crime Team, and it's led by my DCI, Jack Lane, and he's got a number of the team around him, but we focus on 4 detectives: DCI Jack Lane, DS George Stancliffe, DC Bobby King, and WDC Petra Danchuk. So Petra, of course, is not the first female detective in West Yorkshire Police, but there's not been many that have gone before her. And she's been newly brought into the team. So Jack Lane Jack's in his mid-40s. He's been a police officer for 25 years. George Stancliffe is in his 30s, and he's been around the block a bit. But Bobby and Petra have been brought in. They're relatively inexperienced, certainly as detectives. They've only been in the police force a few years themselves. So we have the different personalities, different characters, different backgrounds, but their job is to police serious crime across the city. Murders, kidnaps, robberies, that sort of thing.
Okay. And so who's your main character then, and why should your reader root for him or her?
Well, so I see Jack and Petra really as the two antagonists. Ed, and he keeps everybody under control, but he's very experienced, he's very knowledgeable, and he doesn't really have any time for some of the politicking that goes on with the chief constable and an imbecile of a new assistant chief constable, because you've got to have an imbecile ACC in there. So he's putting pressure on Jack about you've got to solve things, nobody has confidence in the force. So Jack's under that pressure. So Jack normally is calm and manages to deal with pressure, but you start to see a few cracks in this book. There's a few cracks coming. And Petra is the daughter of Polish immigrants. So she was born in Leeds. Her parents came over sort of late 50s, early 60s. So she is born and bred in Leeds, but of course she's faced a lot of problems. She certainly faces a lot of misogyny for being a female detective and a female police officer in the first place, but she also faces prejudice because she's got a Polish name, and even though she's got a Leeds accent, people say, yeah, but where are you, where are you from, where are you really from? And that's so she's got to deal with, got to really try and impose herself and really be a tough cookie to actually I've got quite a nice line, I think, where she's interviewing somebody and he says, oh well, I don't know if I want to, it's a bit sensitive, it's about sex. And so he says, oh, I don't think I should say it in front of a lady. And she says, I believe the word you're looking for is detective.
Fantastic.
So there's a lot of that going on, and you like George and Bobby too, and they're all decent police officers. They're all trying to do their best. They're all really committed to the job, and they want to see things through. They're good police officers, and
it sounds like you've got a really nice dynamic between them. I like the sound of your your DCI, and then your Petra, I think, sounds like she could introduce some nice conflict as well from your your sort of stable your happy DCI. And I like the idea when you were saying about him having a happy home life. That's nice as well, I think, because it kind of runs kind of counter to the stereotype of the divorced alcoholic, socially dysfunctional. So tell us what kicks the story off then. So what's your inciting incident that fires it all up?
We kick off during the rioting. So obviously my detectives wouldn't actually be there on the front line, so I've had to they're there as observers. I've had to kind of invent a way to get them to the riots. So they're at the back of the group, but they're there on behalf of the force to try and observe what's happening. So there's rioting, and there's people throwing bricks, and the windows are getting smashed, and the cars are on fire. And then this woman comes over breathlessly and says, oh, I need the police because I've found a body in my car. There's a boy in my car. So Jack Lane and George Stancliffe have to go and investigate. So this is a few streets away from the main rioting. So they find this boy. He's not dead, but he's been badly beaten, so he's unconscious, and of course they don't know who he is. There's nobody around, nobody wants to knock on, nobody wants to open the door and talk to the police, because this is Chapeltown and they don't really trust the police anyway. So they don't really get a lot out of that, but they have to try and get this boy to hospital. So he gets off to hospital, and so the next day we find out who the boy is, and that actually raises a lot more questions about why was he there, and what's happened here. And then the day after that, so they've got that investigation going on. Then the day after that, body of a Leeds University student is found in an empty house in Meanwood, which is a mile away from where he lives in Headingley. So they've now got this to invest this murder. Well, it is clearly murder because, you know, he's got his head bashed in. So he probably didn't do that himself. So they've now got that to investigate as well. And they've got some other investigations that they've been tasked with. So they're looking into some high-end burglaries that have happened, that a lot of the victims are friends of the chief constable. So he's pretty keen for them to, you know, solve this. So as the book goes on, actually, these investigations start to intertwine and some of the same people start to come up. So they need to find out what's going on. So that's where we start. And that's kind of where we go.
Yeah. Oh, that sounds very dramatic. And so what would you say then are the key themes in the book?
I think there's two key themes, I think, really, as you go on. I think one of the first theme is about justice and social justice and fighting for what you believe in and how far you would go. What are you willing to do? What are you willing to sacrifice? And I think that's quite relevant because it's something that we still discuss. We discuss, you know, Insulate Britain are currently gluing themselves to the M25. And Extinction Rebellion have blockaded streets and cities. So, you know, social disobedience to try and get your point across and to bring about change, you know, how far is too far and what would you do and what should you do? And I think another theme is that the pressure on the police. And I think people forget that the police are just human beings trying to do their job. And, you know, one bad apple can taint the rest of it. I mean, I've got friends that work in the Met and, you know, they feel absolutely devastated about Sarah Everard and what's happened and trust in the police and how that really knocks people's confidence. And actually, they really want people to be, you know, put their trust and their faith in the police. So I think pressure on the police to get things done and to raise confidence and trust, you know, amongst the public, I think is another theme.
That's quite hooky as well, isn't it? You know, they're really, I think that particularly that how far would you go, you know, to what lengths, you know, are you prepared to go, yeah, to bring about change or to prove a point, you know, or to, and how that also links with people's personal ambition as well. And that, I think that can taint things, you know, organizations start off with great aims, but actually they end up just becoming a power play between a few people. And so I think that's part, you know, I think that's relevant as well. And products of their era, you know, products of subject to so many of the sort of, you know, forces, social and political and economic forces as well.
Yeah.
So just, I mean, you've mentioned lots of things that sort of could, you know, that could be, and I'm sure will be seen as strengths, but, you know, what would you describe as the strengths of the book? So why would somebody pick up your book as opposed to, you know, the others on the shelf?
I think a strength, I think the time period, I think the era it's set in is a strength. I think if you're a bit older and you remember that, then it's a bit of nostalgia. But if you're younger, then hopefully it gives you a bit of a different slant on what was going on and what people's opinions were and what was happening. So I think the time period and the city, the place are the strengths. But I think that the public's desire for police procedurals, you know, remains unabated. I think people like to have a puzzle and they like to see something happen and think, well, what's happened here? Well, who's going to be involved in this? And, oh, well, I like that man. Oh, I don't trust that one. And I think they like to see it play out. So I think that police procedural and detectives trying to get to the heart of what's actually happened here. I think that's still a strength, but really I think my place and my time are what sets it apart from other fiction. And I think it's quite nice to look back on a period. I think it's easier to write. Obviously there's some great contemporary fiction written at this time in the 80s. You got PD James and Ruth Rendell and all of them. That's great, but actually it's slightly different writing from a viewpoint at some point in the future and picking up on what's happened in the past, because the outcome, what's coming afterwards. So you can pick apart and bring to the forefront things that you want to bring out. So, and I also think there's a little pang. So when I've been writing bits, obviously a few days after this book finishes is the royal wedding with Charles and Diana, which is not a big part of the book, I have to say. But of course, there's some bits of dialogue, and Petra, my female detective, her mum has bought some commemorative teaspoons, and Petra hasn't got a clue why anybody would need commemorative teaspoons. But as I was writing that, I thought, but we're looking back now, and these characters, this middle-aged woman is buying these teaspoons and she's so looking forward to it, and Lady Di's beautiful and it's such a fairy tale. And actually we've got a little pang because we think, I know how it ends, and my characters aren't going to like it. So I think you can bring in that you can bring in things that they're not going to be happy about, or you can bring in things that that they're going to really look forward to. Yeah,
and I was just thinking as you were talking there, then I think another thing that will make this book unique is the fact that you are a historian, so you are bringing that the historian's slant to the narrative, and you're going to be able to introduce those details. So like when you mentioned about the the spoons and stuff, actually, well, it took me back to some of those things, and some of that memorabilia. I just remember it at the time, the mugs and
the tea. I remember my mum had tea towels
and the stamps and the sort of whatever. So you mentioned also about the writing of it, and so I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that. And so tell us about the sort of the pacing. So what can readers expect then? Is it is it fast paced?
Yeah, pacing is quite important. I like to have the pacing. So what I've tried to, it's not what I would call a taut thriller. So I'm not it's not sort of an American hard-boiled thriller, but it's not cozy crime either, because it's a bit more realistic and a bit more gritty. So there's plenty of action, things happen, there's chases, people run away, people hide things, people are being deliberately obfuscating. So enough things. I kind of tried to make sure there's a bit of a balance between sitting down in somebody's living room and interviewing the deceased's girlfriend, and bringing out that dialogue, and finding out a bit more about what's happened through dialogue, and something actually happening, somebody getting hit, somebody running off after somebody else, and jumping over a river and that sort of thing. I think I tried to kind of balance the pace. So it's not fast, but you get to the end of a chapter and somebody says, or somebody phones somebody else and says, we need to talk. Or it's there's enough, I think, at the end of the chapter. My chapters tend to be between 2,000 and 3,000 words each. So it's not Peter James, a 2-page chapter, but it's kind of a chapter where you can probably get through in 5-6 minutes. So it's enough happens in that. There might be one scene or there might be 2 scenes in that chapter, but enough happens that it then leads you on to sort of think, oh, I know that about that person. Oh, they're not telling the truth. Or, that, they've done that. Oh, what's he going to do now?
Yeah. So, yeah, perfect. And also, whose point of view do we see things from?
It's third person, so I'm kind of taking an overview narrating view. because if you were jumping about between all these, you know, you've got your 4 main detectives, it would be very difficult to do first person, I think. But I think when I'm kind of writing, so if you're following one person, so one detective's gone off to interview somebody, I kind of write it with their voice. So a bit more formal language for one person, or a bit more jokey, or a bit more. So for Bobby, you know, there's a bit more of, well, I'm not really sure why, you know, he's not really sure why that's happening, and that sort of thing. So it's very much, oh, he's gonna do this, and she looked at him suspiciously, that sort of thing. So, but I do think you get a different feel depending on which detective's in the scene.
So does that mean that you have 4 points of view? Is that what you're saying then?
I'm not sure it goes quite that far. I think it is more of an omniscient narrator,
right,
but with just a slightly different bent.
Okay.
Because there are times when you're writing about things where there's none of the detectives, so you're just literally describing, you know, this is the house, and you know, this is the woods, and that sort of thing. Right.
Fab. So before we finish, very importantly then, people need to find out where they can contact you. So what's the best way of doing that?
I tend to use Twitter mainly for my bookish writing pursuits. So my Twitter handle is @Huxter_Kirsty. My email address is krhuxter@aol.com. That's Huxter with an X, not a CK. So I don't have a website yet, because even though I've spent sort of 15 years doing web design and web content, until I've actually got something specific, I don't think. One of my pet peeves is people who come and ask you to design them a website, and when you say, yeah, but you know, what's your content? They don't have any. Well, then it's just a one page on a screen. So so I haven't got my own website yet, but you know, hopefully if things go, I can do my own.
Yeah, definitely.
So
focus on the manuscript. It's manuscript.
But mainly Twitter, I would say.
Fantastic. So Cassie, it's been lovely talking to you. Was there anything that you wanted to add then, just before we finish up? Is there anything that you would like to kind of, you know, add or, you know, say to anybody who might be watching?
No, I think we've covered quite a lot of it, really. As I say, this is my first book. I'm a complete novice, so you know, I'm just writing it and then hoping to get it out there.
Well, it looks, I mean, it's perfectly obvious to me from chatting to you, you know, that you're loving doing it, and, you know, you're putting a whole load of energy, you know, into it in so many different ways, you know, kind of plot wise, craft wise, you know, all the various different ways. So, you know, I think it sounds absolutely fabulous. So it's really lovely talking to you. So I've been with Kirsty Huxter, and I am going to now switch off the record button.